went to public school, another farce of the war on some drugs of the 1980s, the fact that technically even this university is supposed to be a drug-free school zone, where there are enhanced penalties if you get caught within these areas. So even though this is politically supported at the local state level in California, in San Francisco, the DEA sends notices out to that dispensary and others, because if they're close to anything that's federally subsidized, like a after school, a catechism, social services, they got notices saying you either have to shut down or move. So the federal government created this entire nightmare in 1937 by passing these laws. In 1970, realizing it was going to lose in the Supreme Court cases challenging medical marijuana prohibition, because the original law is the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act. Of course, those of you who smoke cigarettes or pick them up on the side of the street, the packs of them realize in every state, at the bottom of every pack of that cellophane is a state-issued tax ID. And that allows for the control of drugs like alcohol and tobacco. And so the great sophistry of all of this is in 1937, they just simply never issued the tax stamps. And so here we are all these years later, and in 1970, when they were about to lose that whole sophistry, they created the Controlled Substances Act, which all of us have largely grown up with, where they take drugs and place them in 5 schedules. Schedule 1 drugs are the drugs like heroin, LSD, and marijuana. Cocaine and other drugs are lower schedules and can be used for actual medical purposes and therapeutic purposes. So the pox is on the House of the federal government, who has yielded no quarter on this, despite the fact that we have 5 pending bills. We have a legalization bill pending, we have a medical marijuana bill pending, we have an industrial bill pending, we have what's called a truth in sentencing bill pending, and another one I'm forgetting here, and we can't even get a subcommittee hearing. They're not going to move in this Congress, and even if they did, those who know how politics work know that 1 senator can stop anything in the U.S. Senate. There are 7 senators, I promise you, in the Senate, that would impale themselves on a sword first on the floor of the Senate before they'd ever be part of a body that allowed marijuana to be legal. I mean, I could name those names. You'd recognize them, like Senator Hatch, or Senator Grassley, or Senator Sessions, or Senator DeMint. And there's some Democrats too, by the way. Mrs. Feinstein, if you can believe it, the former mayor of San Francisco, one of the great progressive women leaders in this country, is so anti-marijuana, it's unexplainable. And yet, she too, in her whole political career, has been doing nothing but fighting against legalization, despite her city and state wanting reforms. Now, Tip O'Neill was my political mentor growing up. And everybody knows Tip's maxim, all politics are local. So how a woman as intelligent as she has never been able to marry, even if she doesn't like marijuana, fine. But you don't have to be an ignoramus about it. So, yes, I don't know that she would impale herself on the sword, but I can promise you. So the point being here is, this is all going to be a long haul. And of course, even if we got through those bodies, you still have to have a president willing to sign the law. And we've never seen anybody in their ascendancy in politics really move the ball that forward. That, frankly, Mr. Carter in '76 and Mr. Obama were about the only 2 people who have ever run for president, got elected president, who at least said or did things that did not embrace the status quo entirely. So if one could just wave a magic wand, the given is we pass a law in Congress and allow states that want to move in this direction to do so, and acknowledging again, if Georgia and Alabama and Kansas doesn't want to move in this direction, they don't have to, and they may never do. But I am afraid that, I shouldn't say I'm afraid, I believe that the policy and the strategy for reformers for some years to come is to continue to push at the state levels. And if we can just simply flip a state to legalize marijuana, and we have 5 bellwethers in this country, California, Texas, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Ohio. If you can flip any one of those states, particularly California, you're moving the country. So I don't want to be around at normal to get to the point where we're at 24 states, 30 states. It'd be great just to flip one more bellwether state. I personally believe an Illinois would be included in there as well. And if you could flip Illinois, flip a Texas, flip a Florida, all totally unlikely, very unlikely on this topic in the next 5 or 10 years. Then that would put the due pressure on the federal government. A note here to look forwardly and to know that we will be talking about this. So if you're here at this university and marijuana matters to you now as a young person, I promise you, in your late 20s and early 30s, you're going to be on the very, very edge of the generation that actually probably legalizes it. Why do I say this? Nate Silver is a friend of mine up at the New York Times. He's a really smart demographer, statistician, and Nate loves to look at macro trends. And he contacted NORML a couple years ago, and I said, listen, we understand you guys keep all the archives, all the records on people's attitudes about marijuana, and we like to do big predictive models. We said, well, that's great. And they said, can you give us all this stuff, and we'd like to come up with something maybe people can use. So about a year ago, he published a paper, and he basically predicts the following. So no matter what we're talking about here today, this is totally in play for the next decade. As indicated earlier, the Gallup poll indicates we're at 50% in the country wanting marijuana legalized. That's great, but we can't politically win with 50%. We can get to 60% in this country, according to Nate's guesstimate, by 2021. So whether you're Republican, whether you're Democrat, conservative, liberal, by 2021, 60% of the public will want marijuana legalized. And therefore, one presumes, unless we don't live in the democracy that we do actually live in, then these laws should reform logically, because 60% of us will want that to happen. Other questions or concerns, critiques, comments, criticisms? We take them all. Yeah.
It's been mentioned that medical marijuana will be up for the vote in Massachusetts next year.
Yep.
But in last year, there was a bonus question in a few certain counties, specifically here in Amherst.
Yep.
Saying, as far as I can remember, it was like, would you be interested in having your state representative vote for, I believe, the legalization of marijuana in general in the state legislature? And I just haven't really heard anything.
Sure. What you're talking about is something that's bizarre, frankly. Only 2 states have what you're talking about, what you call non-binding voter questions. If I'm not incorrect, Nebraska is the only other state where voters can put a question forward, and what we're doing in those questions as advocates who put them on the ballot to be questioned, for reply, is it's not trying to change the law, but it's trying to instruct the legislators what the people really think in a way that's, it's one thing to take a poll, but if you're a real smart political counter, there's only one thing you ever really count: votes. And so, in this case here, we as citizens in Massachusetts can pull on a lever and basically tell them. And so to your point, I think, if I'm not incorrect, there have been 22 of these questions asked since 1994 in Massachusetts. Some have asked about medical marijuana, some have asked decriminalization, some have asked about legalization. None have ever failed in any Massachusetts district where they've been run, but they have no power of law behind them, and if anything, they're kind of a way to broadcast to legislators who are a little weak-kneed on these things, hey, if we actually had a vote on this in a little de-democratic way, people would actually vote on it. So they're really important to vote for them when you get to see them, but they're nothing to get excited about, and they have no force of law behind them. But they're really an odd, unique, democratic thing in Massachusetts. Other questions or concerns about marijuana, legalization, anything? Yeah.
Well, it seems like the general flow of a lot of your presentation involved the frustration over the the dichotomy between the idea of this being very popular and the only support coming from Soros and Lewis.
Yep.
So since there's not any billionaires here, and we're most of the people here are students and just people, I mean, I'm unemployed, I don't
Right.
work, is the effect basically that we are going to have to stand up and organize ourselves and work towards this harder, or is this more of a call for us to give more support to organizations like Normal or LEAP, or what exactly
Well,
is this kind of
very
a
good
call
question.
to action, actually?
Yeah, and you phrased them very well. Number one, an acknowledgement of both failure and giddy expectation. If you take all the drug policy reform groups and you combine all their memberships together and you take out the duplicates, we probably have well under a 0.0001% penetration rate into the marijuana consuming market, meaning that there's probably 30,000 people in the entire United States who are members, who pay money, who are actually into this as dues-paying members. There's approximately 40 million people who use marijuana annually in the United States. So again, a very teeny penetration rate into the market. So for us at Normal and all the other groups, our major failing and what we have to do better is clearly to get, I call it the 1% rule. If just 1%, 1 effing percent of marijuana consumers were involved in their own liberation, we could probably reform these laws quite readily. So that's number one. And two, as I mentioned earlier, is to get the big funders who are out there today to arguably spend their money better building these communities together. The number one thing we get at Normal about what people want, we ask, what do you want? They want that proverbial, I want the March on Washington. I want to basically have my voice heard. So we have to do much better jobs of getting people together. This is a university, you all pay to be here. I was brought in here today for this. But, a Normal conference is $200. If you fly out to it, it's hundreds of dollars. You're going to spend $1,000 to go to the DPA conference next week in Los Angeles. That is very elite. So for this to be a big mass population movement, the threshold to be involved has to be a lot less. And so thankfully the internet makes it so that we can do all of this. But there's no doubt that if 1% of us contacted our legislators and said, I don't want marijuana prohibition anymore, we probably wouldn't have it. It's almost that simple, but we're so pushed in our smoky closets that we haven't gotten there yet. So that's the great challenge, and I think, frankly, that this generation is going to be the ones that's going to push it through here because we're almost there anyways, and you now have the technology to do it, to communicate with each other. So with no other questions, we'll wrap it up, and please join any of the reform groups here at UMass, LEAP, MassCan, Normal, MPP, ASA. If you're only into medical marijuana, it doesn't matter a lick. Just get involved because, again, these reforms will not happen without your participation. So thank you very much.